My name is Devendranath Roshni and I'm from Group 3. Today in History of Philosophy, I'm going to speak about Bertrand Russell, about logical atomism. Nineteenth century, empirism can be characterized in three ways. The first is the development of hypothetical deductive method in science, and which is an enlightenment of the objectives. In 19th century, the empirical generalization, while it cannot be inductively proved, so it is taken to be a hypothetic. And the second is unit of science. So the 20th century is called as unity of science. And the third character is the empirism developed phenomenalism. And these three characters of 19th century is the empirism is with Bertrand Russell. And his initial interest in mathematics and logics. And he was a mathematician, and the ideas is that mathematics, the arithmetics or geometrics can all be formalized as deductive system, and they developed symbolism, that is algebraic symbolism. And he also wrote an introduction to mathematical philosophy. His major works were epistemology, begins with the popular work called Problems of Philosophy, that is in 1910. And he can and should be organized into atomic proposition, and atomic proposition combined to form molecular proposition. And atomic proposition refers to atomic facts, and so the molecular proposition is refers to the molecular facts. So the atomic proposition corresponds to atomic facts and organize those propositions into a formal deductive system. And atomic facts is the smallest consistence of reality, and relationship between atomic facts is not realistic. On the basis of metaphysical pluralism, he comes with his theory of logical atomic that tries to identify atomic facts. And he accepted the notion that consciousness has intentionally, that it is the mental act that intends an object. Atomic propositions are constituents of languages, and he says for a proposition to be true, there has to be one-to-one correlation. Thank you.
Здравствуйте. My name is Kalatil Muhammad Alfat Rahman and I'm from third group. So today I'm going to speak about Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, he made a major contribution to the conversation on language, logic and metaphysics, but also on ethics, on the way that we should live in the world. Wittgenstein, he had a lifelong interest in the religion and claimed to see every problem from a religious point of view, but never committed himself to any formal religion. His various remarks on ethics also suggest a particular point of view, and Wittgenstein often spoke of ethics and religion of together. In his work of philosophical investigation, Wittgenstein regularly referred to the concept of language games, uh, uh, which they rejected the idea that the language is somehow separate and corresponding to reality. And he argued that the concept do not need the clarity for meaning. Justin did not hold religious beliefs, but he argued that when it come to his relation with people who do hold religious beliefs, he was not in a marketplace of contradictory claims. A religion need to be based on a belief in existence of supreme being, nor must it be a mainstream of faith. His various remarks of ethics also suggest a particular point of view, and in his philosophical approach, but never committed himself to any formal religion. Spasiba.
I am Kaipada Tinod Chandra from third group. Today I am going to speak about the logical positivism. Logical positivism, later called as logical empiricism, and both of which are together also known as neo-positivism, was a movement in Western philosophy whose central thesis was verification principle. This theory of knowledge asserted that only statements variable through direct observation or logical proof are meaningful. Starting in the late 1920s, groups of philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians formed the Berlin Circle and the Vienna Circle, in which in these two cities would propound the ideas of logical positivism. Flourishing in several European countries through the 1930s, the movement sought to prevent confusion rooted in unclear language and unverifiable claims by converting philosophy into scientific philosophy, which according to the logical positivists ought to share the basis and structures of empirical sciences. Best example, such as Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, despite its ambition to overhaul the philosophy by studying and mimicking the extent conduct of empirical science, logical positivism became enormously stereotyped as a movement to regulate the scientific process and to place strict standards on it. After World War II, the movement shifted to a milder variant, logical empirism, led mainly by Karl Hampel, who during the rise of Nazism had immigrated to United States. In the ensuing years, the movement central premises, still unresolved, were heavily criticized by leading philosophers, particularly William van Orman Quine and Karl Popper, and even within the movement itself by Hampel. By 1960, the movement had run its course. Soon, publication of Thomas Kuhn's landmark book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, dramatically shifted academic philosophy's focus. By then, neo-positivism was dead, or as dead as philosophical movement ever becomes. As a definition, logical positivism is sometimes stereotyped by as forbidding talk of unobservable, such as microscopic entities, or such notions as causality and general principle. But that is an exaggeration. Rather, most neo-positivists view talk of unobservable as metaphorical or elliptical, direct observation phrased abstractly or indirectly. So, theoretical terms would rather garner meaning of observational terms via correspondence rules, and thereby theoretical laws would be reduced to empirical laws. Via Bernard Russell's logicism, reducing mathematics to logic physics, mathematical formulas would be converted to symbolic logic. Via Russell's logical atomism, ordinary language would break into discrete unit of meaning. Rational reconstruction then would convert ordinary statements into standardized equivalents, all networked and united by logical syntax. A scientific theory would be stated with its method of verification, whereby a logical calculus or empirical operation could verify its falsity or truth. The criticisms of logical positivism. There were many internal arguments within the logical positivism movement in which the reality was only ever a loose collective of philosophers holding a wide range of beliefs on many matters, although with the certain principles in common. Critics have argued that logical positivism insists on the strict adoption of verifiability criterion of meaning on a non-analytic meaningful sentence to be either verifiable or falsifiable is problematic as criterion itself is unverifiable, especially for negative essential claims and positive universal claims. Logical positivism did not fail because it denied the human emotion. Logical positivism failed because it tried to reduce the concept of meaning to process of verification, and it became increasingly clear that it was an impossible task. Thank you. The philosophy of language. More recent development of philosophy of language have involved development in metaphysics in ontology. That wouldn't be so shouldn't be a great surprise when we recognize that the categories of thought, categories of being, in that sense, the logical categories evident in language would be related to ontology. And particularly when we are talking about the demise of logical positivism and in the way in which its a reductionist view of language eliminated metaphysics, it's understandable that new views of language would open up to metaphysics. I want to divide it into three topics. The first has to do with the logical entities in addition to physical entities. How does this sort of question arise in connection with language? And we have to go back to the Frege, who is in the early part of the century was quite influential. He distinguished between the sense and reference in regard to the language. You can have a sentence which has both sense and reference. Distinguishing between the sense and reference, sometimes we consider sense as the intentional meaning and the reference as the extensional meaning. Karl Popper distinguishes, however, not just these two worlds of sense and reference, but distinguishes between the third world, that is a physical object. There are two things involved in the intentional level: mental state and the logical object. Your mental state has to do with certain words which are vehicles for the logical object, which is the universal, that is unchangeably what it is. Logical object as distinct from the physical object. Logical object would be the essential nature of humanness, and the physical object are the humans. Now, as you could imagine, this notion of logical object to which the Frege and Popper is saying is going to be challenged by anybody with a strongly empiricist bit. And that's precisely the case with W.V. Kuhn, who challenged it in an essay of his called Logic Without Ontology. Is that meaning a function of language, not a mental state? He takes language to be verbal behavior, a kind of physical behavior. He uses the fancy word syncatagoromatic words like roundness, humanness, they used to called universal terms. It is the language that classifies similar things. So we organize our work by means of language we use. The sets of categories of things do not have real essence in common. There are simply empirical similarities which we drew together in this syncatagoromonic terminology. Nicholas Walter Storr wrote a book called On Universals that was published in the late 70s by University of Chicago Press. Incidentally, his book reviewed when it came out as perhaps the best book on theory of universals in the 20th century, and it established his professional reputation in this analytic field. What he does was to speak of universals as possibles, that is unchanging logical possibilities. What he is doing is saying that this world is any possible world. What he is trying to say is that this world and any possible world is such that there are only certain kind of things that are logically possible. He is trying to introduce the discussion of universals as a realm of possibilities. What he is doing is spinning off some of Whitehead's terminology, where what these logical possibilities are eternal objects as distinct from the actual entities of the space-time world. He is not a Whiteheadian, but he is picking up on the notion of the universal in the Whiteheadian terms. Because of the radical changes that it makes in the Platonism, he is in the Plato and Platonism, the most real things were universal and particulars were, to use the Platonian metaphor, shadows.
What a Stow is saying is that particulars are the actual entities and the independently existing real things, and these actual entities that initiate some of these possibilities of humanists in our individual life. He was trying to develop the ontology to underlie the view that there are objective aesthetic value. And the second issue that comes up in connection with the philosophy of language is the realism issue. And there are only a particulars of scenes experienced organized in a different way by the means of languages that we employ.
Hilary Putnam, who is quick to grant the alternative constructs certainly possible and the scientific theories, of course, which subject to revision, or he is rejecting foundationalism. He insist that our constructs are not just conventional ways of talking. He justifies it that we have firm knowledge, observation, and material entities that are firmly known. In other words, they are given. The argument is a counterfactual statement that cannot be reduced without a reminder. If they cannot, then you have to be a realist about possible words, but to be a realist about possible words, but to be a realist about logic entity. Спасибо.